It is really a pleasure to welcome you here to our 2026 Spring Dean Salon. And I want to situate you in the audience for those of you who are just coming down for this event and those of you online who are tuning in for this event. This Dean Salon is taking place in the middle of a conference about the state of live theater, the ability to develop and cultivate new work in the current moment that we're in that I don't need to describe. So we have brought all kinds of people to this convening. So there's universities here like Northwestern, Virginia Tech, Harvard, obviously the University of Chicago. There are established theatrical enterprises like Steppenwolf and Goodman here in Chicago, La Jolla Playhouse here from California, and others. I'm just giving you like a little sample. And experimental theaters like, I forgot the name, sorry, Remy Bumpo. So there's lots and lots. Chicago is a great city to be hosting such a convening because we're a place where lots of theater happens in lots of different ways, and we're all feeling the challenges in different ways. And so for our special enjoyment, we get to catalyze this conversation even further, and I promise you we will solve these problems by the end of the hour. But we get to bring two of the great people in theater. We brought Avery Hoffman here to become the artistic director of Court Theater, which is a, yes? Court is a Tony Award-winning regional theater nested inside of a university, but has made exceptional use of that relationship to the university. Before coming to Chicago, she was the inaugural artistic director of Brown Arts Institute at Brown University, where she oversaw the opening of the Lindemann Performance Center and produced over 50 projects that brought together students, faculty, and internationally renowned artists, including Carrie Mae Weems, William Kentridge, and Peter Sellars himself. Previously, Hoffman was the director at the Park Avenue Armory of New York City. She also led content development for permanent exhibitions at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, the International African American Museum in Charleston, South Carolina, and her early career included roles at the New York City Opera, the Clinton Foundation, TED, and Focus Features, and I'll also add she has a PhD in classics. So you thought you were well-credentialed. No. So she's the perfect person for the Court Theater in every dimension. Then we have, as I'm sure you are so excited to hear, the inimitable Peter Sellars. Peter Sellars is one of the most influential and imaginative directors working today, working in the last decades, I would say. I won't say how many decades, Peter. He's a MacArthur Fellow. He was a MacArthur Fellow. He is a distinguished professor at UCLA, and he spent decades thinking about opera and theater, what it can do in the world, how it can breathe new life into classical works, and championing contemporary voices. That's a terrible word, championing. He has long-standing composer relationship with John Adams. He's produced landmark works such as Nixon in China, The Death of Klinghoffer, and Dr. Atomic, and his productions have appeared all over the world on its leading stages. At UCLA, his teaching through courses such as Art as Social Action, Art as Moral Action, and initiatives such as the Boethius Institute brings artists, scholars, and activists together to engage urgent national questions. So there's no better person to be here talking to us today. Let me give you the run of show of the Dean Salon. I will ask Avery and Peter to say a few things that they're thinking about around these questions of sustaining live performance. Where do we go? How do we invent new models for doing this, given not just the kind of funding crisis across this, but changing habits of viewing. I feel among students a real urgency to be in a room together doing things. So I think the next generation is poised to grasp onto this. But Avery and Peter will each set out a few things that they've been thinking about. And we want to continue the conversation, but add in more voices to the convening that you've been having all day, thinking about these very urgent questions that are touched not only on the life of an art form, but our civic and democratic life. So Avery, if you'd start us off, and I will ask a few questions, and then we will have them talk for a little bit, and then we'll all talk together. So, Avery.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I don't know why I'm in the center, but anyway, I appreciate
I do know why, but that's because I'm a director.
I know. He told me to sit here. I'm sitting here. Um, welcome to everyone. Thank you so much, Dean Nelson, for the invitation to be part of this Dean Salon. I am so new to the University of Chicago, to Court Theater, of course not new to the world of theater and the world of arts, but one of the things that it's like I have my notebook, I'm learning so much. I've been learning so much across the day. We have gathered folks from across the country to really kind of be in community together, which I think is part of the power of theater, to gather, to be a place where people feel, dare I say, safe and comfortable sharing some of the challenges and the joys. We've been talking about joys and challenges across the day, and I love positioning that as an entry question. Like, what are those joys? What are those challenges right now? We're all well aware of the state of the world, and I think what happens on a university campus can be a microcosm of what's happening out in the world, but it's also a shielded place in many ways where we have the opportunities to explore some things. And so it's been a real treat to host folks from across the country, as you mentioned. We sent out an invitation to over 100 people who are artistic directors and producers, directors of new works, on the occasion of Court Theater's first sort of homegrown musical out here, which is opening this weekend, is in previews. I hope some of you have seen it and will come and see it. So I started in November, and I thought, well, that was really a hot minute ago. And so what could I do in my early days to learn about Chicago, learn about University of Chicago, learn about Court? Who are the folks who are doing the amazing work in this city, on this campus? What is the relationship between Court, as you said, a Tony Award-winning theater on a university campus, and what are our rights and responsibilities in that role, right? And thinking very much, I have to say that I've worked with Peter for, actually, I think almost to this day, Peter, 20 years. And I think about this day because my aunt, at the time, I was finishing up my PhD in classics at Oxford, and in that existential crisis that one goes through when you finish a PhD, should I be an academic? What should I do? And my aunt said to me, well, you got to go meet my friend Peter. I was like, yes, ma'am, I will go meet your friend Peter. She said, go to the vitamin section of Fairway Market on the Upper West Side. At this time, it was literally April 14th, and just go there. And of course, there is actually a cafe in the vitamin section, which I did not know. So I show up, and here's Peter Sellars, and it was the beginning, I think, for me, a journey over the last 2 decades of thinking about what it means for the theater to be a civic space, and for the theater to be a place that is valued as a site of inquiry, curiosity, freedom, failure, a space where we need to be courageous and we need to support things that are in incubation, that are not quite ready, things that are on their journey. And so that, to me, was a really formative moment, meeting you in the vitamin section at Fairway Market. And I remember you talking about theater as, a moral action, social action, this sort of civic, and that has stuck with me literally for 20 years. And I feel like my journey through time and space has been an exploration of what that means. And so here we are, on campus, here I am. And so I'm in a space of learning and a space of openness. I'm excited to meet people. I've had a series of amazing welcomes in all these different forms. And what I'm sensing is the openness and the excitement for what we could call a new era for Court, a new era for this campus. And I'm excited to think about how the theater works in tandem with the university, how we share resources, how we think about the support networks that are needed. And I mean, Peter, you've told me so many stories. We won't talk about UCLA right in this moment, but the journey of the work you've tried to do at UCLA and how you have also done that work outside of the university campus. Peter has an incredible set of classes that have hundreds of students that go through it, and that class, Art as Social Action, Art as Moral Action. I feel like I'm like the perennial TA/student in that class. And one of the great things about my journey to this moment is that when, Peter has to go back and teach, that means I got to get a day job for a little bit. And I've had these incredible experiences working at the Smithsonian, working at Focus Features, this kind of hustle that one has to do in the theater to make ends meet has opened up like incredible opportunities for me that I now all bring to this campus. And I'm really grateful for those times where I was forced to get a day job because you had to go teach. So I'm super grateful for that. And I just want to say, too, that these few days, this particular conversation is, I hope, also an invitation to you all to be part of this conversation about how we are as theater goers, how we are as an audience, how we are in relation to artists, in support of artists. We've been talking across today about really inventive ways, new models, as you mentioned. And I think the times are such that it requires some new thinking. We've been having some conversations, too, about sort of what happens when it all gets burned down, like what do we build in its place, and what are the things that are important to us, what really matters. And I think being on a campus with folks who are willing and excited to have those conversations is really important. That does not happen everywhere. And so I'm excited to see how the relationships that we are building across these couple days manifest into the future. And so there's some seeds being planted, which I think is really exciting. So I know often people are like, what's your vision, for Court? And I said, just hold on 1 minute. I ask for time, just a little bit of time and space and grace to absorb, to think about what might be a really beautiful direction that we might all go in together. We talked a little bit today also about what collective thinking means and the hive mind, and really being in space with folks who are doing similar kinds of work, similar kinds of challenges and joys, and breaking through the hierarchical, space to come up with some new ideas. So I'm excited for Court's future. I'm excited that there's so much support and love for Court on this campus. Look forward to seeing you all at the theater, and looking forward to this conversation. So there's just a few things, as Peter would say, to put in the air. I'm sure you will put some more things in the air.
I'll keep going. Is that okay? Just to first of all say I'm thrilled to be here, of course, and even in the years I was working with the Lyric Theater, some of the most memorable projects we made were together with the University of Chicago, and I've had just really overwhelming experiences in this neighborhood. I think we're at a really powerful place right now. The world changed profoundly in the last 2 years, and it's a different place. And so whatever was going on before, it's not coming back. So let's move on. We have no choice. We can't go backwards. And as I try to explain to my students, believe me, it was never good. So press on.
You're not leaving Arcadia.
Right. I just want to
good.
say press on. Don't get thinking that any moment in the past was nicer. It was not. Meanwhile, we also learned in the 20th century that some of the activities that have a manifestation in the universities, which work as intellectual knowledge and as a kind of moment of ideological, clarity, in fact, have catastrophic results in the real world. And the University of Chicago is one of those places that visited upon the world all kinds of things. And for me, this question of just giving academia another space, which is not ideological, but is called embodied knowledge and lived truths, that are not just being claimed in a moment when our whole country is inundated by massive disinformation? What does it mean to be able to verify something from human testimony and actually be in the room as someone lives through the implications and the results of certain actions? And that's why theater was invented. Is what does this look like in a human life? In a context of a community? In a situation where all of the elements are in motion, because they are. Now let's look at these ideas. Now let's feel and search again for our principles as we are presented with the human evidence. And what does it mean for students to learn in another way, which is not just through passing tests from books they've read, but experiential learning? What does it mean to learn from a set of experiences? And so the presence of the arts on this campus is so powerful at this moment to move this life of the mind into the body and into the heart of a city. And I must say the same thing as the arts have been in their own ghetto, in beautifully funded arts centers. But actually the arts need to be everywhere else, in hospitals, in prisons, in court. The arts need to be everywhere but an arts center. And so for me, universities and the arts are now adjacent, and we now look to a deeper level of the arts going to a new place because it's situated in a university, and then a university having new powers of communication and a public face because of the presence of the arts. And I would just like to mention today a couple of images for everybody to just hold on to, but I'm teaching my other class, which is Myth and Ritual at the moment, which is pretty dense, and I'm starting, of course, with the Greeks, just because democracy is in trouble, of course. And for the ancient Greeks, first of all, it wasn't theater. We call it theater. They didn't call it theater. For them, it was an actual ritual, like a prayer, of how you influence future reality, which is what a prayer is, something we go through and we make the motions in our body, we meet the gods, and we say, will this work out, and does this have integrity to each other? The Greeks did this incredible thing of creating Epidaurus, this theater, which is 10,000 people in these rings carved into the side of a mountain. And the key thing about this is one person speaking from there can be heard by all 10,000 people. Because that was the commitment to democracy, is that no voice is unimportant, and we need to hear every voice. The whole community needs to be able to hear one voice. As you know from ancient Greek democracy, which lasted about 12 seconds, and then the next official democracy to arrive in the world arrived 22 centuries later with our country. It was, of course, challenged by the oligarchs to begin with, which is why every Euripides play has a speech saying nobody could possibly confuse money with freedom. They're really different topics. But the point was to create a maintenance system for democracy, because democracy can't deliver its promises, or can deliver them only very rarely. And therefore, you need to keep democracy alive in your mind as a set of possibilities that you're still working on. That it's not over and finished, it's this big project that's moving across generations. In the ancient Greek democracy, of course, if you were a white male, so to speak, you could vote, you could speak in the Senate. The people who could not speak in the Senate were women, children, slaves, and foreigners. The title of every surviving Greek play is the name of a woman, a child, a slave, or a foreigner. Hello? I think there's a project here. In any case, just to say, when you went to Epidaurus, it was, Now it's about 2 hours outside of Athens if you're driving. So who knows what it was in the 5th century, that 5th century. All I want to say is I just want to give you an image of what it was to visit Epidaurus when Euripides was alive. You had to get to this fishing village, and then there's an 8-mile walk up the mountain in this long curving path over the Aegean. These views, these vistas emerge that are breathtaking. The pine trees get taller, the air gets clean and crisp. And then in the pine trees, the end of the 8 miles, there are Greek columns appearing in between the pine trees. You step through this propylaeon, the gate that Goethe loved, and the first place you go is the temple immediately on your right, which is the temple of Asclepius. Asclepius was the mythical figure who invented medicine, and the snakes are his snakes. You went into the temple and you talked to the staff about your medical issues and everything you're concerned about that's happening in your body that you haven't told anyone. You spend your first night at Epidaurus sleeping on the floor of the temple of Asclepius, and the snakes enter your dreams in the night and tell you about the next steps of your treatment. You wake up in the morning, and the next temple is the Odeon, the temple of sacred food and music. Your first meal of your new life is to eat food without toxins and have your mind opened by music. Then the Greeks, who have this giant investment in the heroes of the past, invented something that was amazing. It's called the Olympics. Yeah. And it's the idea that this 17-year-old is faster than anyone ever was, ever, including all the people in Homer. And it's a way to praise and recognize and honor young people and see that they're better than we ever were, and we have to give them everything. Meanwhile, they did the Olympics while the Greeks were always fighting some war. There was always an Olympic truce. And when it was time for the Olympics, you brought the kids from all the countries you were fighting to Greece and their parents, and they met each other. And they rode horses, and they wrestled, and they shot arrows. Then, at the end of the day of Olympics, you go up the hill to the theater where you see 3 plays about children killing their parents, parents killing their children, how you treated the prisoners in the last war, youth suicide, all these things that are unspeakable at your own dinner table in your own home, that you cannot discuss, that are absolutely forbidden in your household. And we're talking about them with 10,000 people. But how do you discuss something difficult and painful? It helps to have very good music. It helps to have dance, where the body can speak and say things that are unspeakable. It helps to create this multi-leveled, interdisciplinary dimension of expressing things not only in words, but you've hired the best poets living, but have things expressed in this context of this vast dreamscape, because we're dreaming of the society we actually want to live in. And the Supreme Court cannot legislate anything that prevents youth suicide. Something we have to handle as people, as communities, the most urgent questions. And then after the last play, everybody goes up to the top of the last mountain, and there's an all-night dance party with outstanding hallucinogenics. So anyway, I just want to give you an image. That's what theater was. Right. And I think that's what theater has to be again. Particularly at this time, When you make a theater, you have to have a place where people bring their kids to get medical checkups. You have to have a place where people can get assistance with immigration law. You have to make the theater the center where all the things that are missing in your life are all there. And the theater is the magnet, but it's also because so many people are afraid to go into a hospital, are afraid to go into a legal question about immigration. The theater, the art space, is the welcoming space where people dare to go in with their kids and say, okay, while we're there, we can take care of all these other things. And the theater is about our health, our mental health, but also our bodies. And we need to make theater not its own independent thing that just does the new play. The new play is part of a much bigger picture. And if I could just add one more image for you, which is from this continent, which is Northern California, all these dense, packed Native American tribes in Northern California. I have to say this because I'm in Chicago, the city of Danny Newman, who, as you probably know, invented the idea of the subscription season, right? That thing was invented by Danny here in this city, and then went all over the world like the drug war. And just to say, maybe there are alternatives to making a season. In the Native American world, a season is seasonal. And it has to do with the second week of October. This berry ripens. And your tribe does not have enough people to pick these berries while they're ripe. So you create a festival with music, ritual, singing, dancing, that weekend. 8 tribes show up to help pick the berries, and everybody gets together and deals with things they really need to deal with, ceremonially and over food. I think that's the future of the subscription season. And I think right now in America, we all have so many things we have to deal with and face. And we now need to find new coalitions, new ways of gathering people, new ways of meeting people, new ways of breaking bread with people, which is the only time you're human. And so food has to be part of the picture. All these things have to be part of the picture. So theater is part of, again, not a marketing proposition, but a movement. And it's a movement that is not going to come from our government. It's a movement that has to come from the roots, which is what the Greeks had in mind. So I would present to you as theater is not just entertainment, it's actually the moment of focus, the moment of sharing and awareness, and the moment of new vision.
That's very beautiful. I'm so happy to hear that. So let me pick. I'm going to try to keep my eye on the time. Rivki, you'll help me, right? Okay. So we had Yuval Sharon here last year for the Berlin Lectures. Yuval just did this amazing production of Tristan and Isolde at the Met. Everybody's writing about it. It's this amazing thing, blah, blah, blah. It's so great. And one of the things which it was, I'm not saying it's not, I'm just saying one thing that Yuval was trying to talk about, and which you're saying, and which we are experimenting with next year, is the spaces themselves are kind of prisons in a way. So he was saying, like, the problem with the Met is it's so huge that it locks you into all kinds of production choices just because of the sound and the orchestra and the this and the that. I mean, they figured that out. But court theater is not about a royal court. It's about a courtyard. It used to be in a courtyard, right? So out in the agora, maybe, I don't know, not on a mountaintop, but in probably a pretty grubby court, but people came out and watched the theater there, and then slowly things institutionalized. And that is true of just post-war theater and post-war universities. They grew up at the same time. Everybody got their symphony and their orchestra and their opera house and all these things, really post-45, with the rise and democratization of higher ed as they built out the universities. And universities are often, like we're talking about, we're in a city, you're in a city, but if you're in Cortland, New York, where the State University of Cortland is, State University of New York, you are the cultural center of that region. that is where theater happens. That's where you can hear music. That's where you can hear. So like some of this is a really perilous moment as the fate, the twinned fate of arts and universities are struggling. Let's say I never am going to say, okay, yeah, it's over. Like I'm not a doomsayer.
No, it's not over.
I'm a.
You know what? It's not over because it's not. Life isn't that easy. That it can just be over.
But I'm saying,
it has to continue. That's the crisis.
But you're saying you've always saying what you're saying. We're doing this at Rockefeller Chapel with Sophronia next year, which is a work that we also developed. But and that's because Court needs some reconstruction. But we're bringing it into a big chapel, and like there's site-specific theater. There's a lot. Now they're not tied to the kind of gatherings that you're talking about, where other dimensions of life are brought into the fold of theatrical experience. But
I think that's one of the deep
where are some of the things
is
we're supposed to be doing here that come out of these kinds of experiments that are struggling against the space of containment for the big things we built
I
for
think
the last
because
45,
of the crisis of
50
American
years.
cities, of the deep segregation,
Yeah.
one of the things we have to do is both maintain the temple, yes, but also sacralize where everybody lives.
Yeah.
And so I think both things are necessary. There has to be a place where it's a relief to come and feel safe.
Yeah.
But there also has to be, wherever you live, this really high level of cultural engagement that is placed there deliberately. And where because a lot of my work is exactly in situations where your presence in that neighborhood shifts a dynamic in very powerful ways.
Right.
And to do performances exactly in the park that has the highest level of gang homicides and blah, 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 is to actually shift the narrative of that park.
Yeah.
And to create another set of possibilities for the people who live there and for the rest of the city, which has an image of that park that has been fixed a long time ago. And you just want to say, well, excuse me, let us create, which is what culture can do, the arts can do, is shift the dynamic, create another set of images, create another set of engagements, have people meet and rub shoulders who would never meet and rub shoulders, and also give the gang members something exciting to do, which these are thoughtful, sensitive people over and over and over again who have everything else that they want to be. And a cultural project gives them the space to be the person they actually imagine themselves to be. And I think that's one of the biggest projects in America is we type people so early. And you need to have this presence of a cultural project that gives everyone room to shift their identities. Because everybody's identity, whether you're a cop or whatever, your identity hardens. And every human being needs a chance to soften that fixed identity and imagine yourself as someone else and to imagine someone else.
Avery, do you want to talk a little bit about experiment? You can talk about the past. We don't need to know what Court's doing in the future. I know that you are loath to set that out at the moment, which power to you. I like your process.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I also think a lot about the space of sharing, the space of convening, the space of gathering. And, one of the things that was so powerful to me in our Flexin project, we did a dance project. We also did it up at Dartmouth. We did several places represented in this room. And that project was centered on a group of young men who were from East New York, which was at the time the murder capital of definitely New York, maybe the whole East Coast. And the ways in which we, and really Peter, you and Reggie, worked with that community of young men and some young women to, as you were saying earlier, embody their stories. This was a dance piece. But part of my role was to bring folks to the pre-show conversation, which we deliberately had at Curtin, so you could not avoid it. You sat down, you thought you were going to see a show, but for like 15 minutes, we're just going to talk a little.
Yeah, that's great.
And during those pre-show conversations, we had the Brooklyn DA, we had the NYPD, we had this amazing, do you remember the chaplain from Rikers Island who was this nun who had been there for 40 years? We had all of these incredible people in conversation with young folks who had just gotten out of Rikers, or folks who had been on the other side of things, right? And so these conversations where the space of the theater was broken down because there was a cop in the room, like we were having, and the NYPD said yes, and the Brooklyn DA said yes, because it was a theater piece. So please come and have this conversation about stop and frisk, about solitary confinement, like these really, really tough and hard topics. And we did this at the Park Avenue Armory, which, well, it's an armory, literally was an armory. And so the space of that prohibitive space where literally, the arms were stored there in the Civil War. This idea that theater could break down those boundaries. And I often tell the story of one of these conversations where the NYPD officer, who then became the deputy commissioner several years later, so this is a real high-ranking person, who told us the story that he had actually, his high school had run track in this armory at the time. So he had like these really fond memories, like, yes, I'll come to the armory and have this conversation. He heard the story of, I think it was one of the dancers who, during our rehearsal process, was picked up and ended up in Rikers for a very long, like a ridiculously long time. And this young man told his story. And at the end, when we wrapped up 15 minutes, the show's about to start, that NYPD cop gave him his get out of jail card and said, if you need anything, you call me. And I often tell that story because that, to me, was the theater being the invitation to have really conversations that are not going to happen elsewhere. And the structural elements, we worked against them, right? We worked against those structures, and
But the different structure actually enabled it, right?
Yeah, you need theater to touch
right?
reality,
Yeah.
because reality is theater,
Right.
And people are just going through their roles.
Yeah.
And theater is the place where people can drop their roles and be human together.
Yeah.
And also, the big project of America is, what does equality look like? Equality. That's what we're founded on. What would equality actually look like? We can show you.
Yeah. I want to start with the quick Q&A because I'm sure people are just biting their tongue right now and about to scream out their question. Rivki, I know we wanted to have one of our online questions start the day, so can you give us that question?
Hi, everyone. Okay, so this being a salon, anyone can ask their question and shape the conversation. We actually have a student from the dramaturgy cohort asking the first question, followed by Zoom Q&A. Marissa will introduce the student here.
Yes, I'm going to introduce my student, who I believe is coming down from the sound booth as we speak. But the dramaturgy cohort is a group of students at the University of Chicago who have been experimenting with dramaturgy methods together and then thinking about how we integrate those methods into courts' rehearsal processes and other institutional ways of thinking about theater. And I'm going to keep vamping. There's Joe. But this is a great group that's been supporting the work of court season also in general. So Joe Sholmetzi is going to ask the first question.
Hi. Nice
Hello.
To meet you. Hello.
Thanks for doing sound.
Thank you. So I've been listening up in the booth to you guys' conversation, and I wanted to touch a little bit on what you were mentioning about theater as a place of sort of unification, community, humanity, and acknowledge also that I think that the time that we're in right now necessitates activism. And I would like to know sort of your view on how, if at all, theater can be an empowering, activizing force and not just sort of this soothing balm to make people unite with each other, but also to push them into action.
Yeah, again, thank you. As you know, most plays by Euripides are not exactly soothing. It is super provocative. And I would just mention that, again, the first show I directed, the only show I've directed at the Goodman Theater was The Merchant of Venice, which I did as a way of explaining and exploring the LA uprising, where people set fire to their own neighborhoods in a Artaud-like level of rage and hurt. And Shakespeare's point of his racism is economic, which is why his play about racism is The Merchant of Venice. And we made that show here in Chicago with a very, very, very diverse and intense group of actors. John Ortiz, Philip Seymour Hoffman. It was a really amazing group. And we had high school students from South Chicago in the room every day during rehearsals, shouting and super intense. And the performances had this just really intense quality. And we did and the show was sold out entirely. The whole run was sold out at the Goodman. And the first preview, there were 17 people left in the theater by Act 4. And the degree of rage, the degree of rejection, the degree of challenge was very, very intense. And for me, theater is also a really important place for that. And it's also the place where, you know, a lot of my productions have been. When we did The Persians in the middle of the Gulf War, again, the same thing. American audiences standing up, throwing their programs at the actors, and really, again, emptying the theater during the performance in a really super angry way. That's something powerful, because people are having an experience they're never going to forget. And I don't need people to agree or disagree. I just need the actual encounter took place. But activism is the only thing we can be doing. And that's what culture is for. And culture is part of a layer of not just bringing people together, but if I could say the most important things in your life that someone needs to tell you, you can only hear them if they're told to you by a close friend. Sometimes if you just say a truth, but you say it to somebody you don't know and you don't have a context, it backfires and actually creates a bigger divide. And so I would just say cultural work is one of the steps on the way. For one thing, as an artist, you don't need everybody to love you. You don't need everybody to vote for you. So you can put out things that are really challenging, and that's super important. And at the same time, because at the end of the day, people are operating from things that are deep inside them. And it's not just ideological. It's really, they grew up that way, they believe these things. And it's their culture. It's not just their opinion. And if we're just having an opinion argument, it's really shallow. But most people who are dug in on these topics, because it's a whole culture, it's a whole way of seeing the world. And so what you have to do is enter that cultural space, which is a deep set of belief systems, a deep set of memories, a deep set of hardened experiences, and you have to open a flexible place exactly there, and a place that's clearly has a lot of pain attached to it, because you know when you're touching a nerve. And after you touch a nerve, what do? So the attempt is to have something, a longer level, a longer type of conversation, and not just throw everything away in the first moment. So that's the hope. And again, they're across all the projects, you know, we do, there are just all kinds of different strategies. But part of the strategy, of course, is that theater knows how to shock people in ways that are really deep, and that you don't forget. And when Avery said we're planting some seeds, that is, I think, what we do, because real change doesn't happen overnight. That's for the business world that can put this brand of toothpaste and all the CVS's in the world in one day. Or if you're just destroying things, it fits perfectly in the one-day news cycle. You can destroy things, and it's a headline the next day. If you're going to build something, it's going to take 3 generations. And so culture moves more slowly, more carefully, but becomes the way a generation understands itself. So just to say, I'm at all kinds of different levels of activism, yes, yes, yes. And that's a lot of what my current classes are all about. And I have the most beautiful activists in that class. But also, there have to be several other layers and several other types of dimension that allow everyone to be human and recognize everybody as human. And there has to be some place that is genuinely inclusive of the people you hate.
Mm-hmm.
And that we're all in this place together because we're all on this planet together. And it's not going to work just me and my friends. I've got to do this. Whatever we're going to do, we're going to all have to do together. And so what this country is not so good at, what Western culture is not so good at, is something called shared space. Space that doesn't just my space, but the space that we can occupy together. And we're not owning the real estate. It's a shared moment. And that's what the hope of theater is.
Thank you.
Speaking of shared space,
Yes?
we have a question.
Does that make
from
sense?
the-
Is that acceptable?
Well,
Speaking of shared space, we have a question from our Zoom audience. I wonder what work has been done to ask the Southside communities what sort of collaborations they would like to engage with respect to university theater.
Wow, great question. I wish Camila was here. I don't know if she is here. Camila is our Director of Engagement at the Court Theater. And I have really been enjoying meeting Camila and learning about the very rigorous ways in which she's thinking about that very question. And I think it speaks a little bit to what Peter just said, that it is a long game, right? And the ways in which Camila and the Court Theater, and again, I'm very new, I'm just learning about all these incredible initiatives, the way in which there is a considered understanding of the South Side, there's a considered understanding of Court's place in this particular community, its relationship to the university, and the relationship to folks who live within the sort of 10 to 15 block radius. There have been a set of activities that Camila and her team have been engaged in over time now for several years, many years, and she's building those relationships, she's building the platforms for conversation, interviewing folks, having really amazing feedback loops after activities that are happening. And so you can, I think most of it is posted on Court's website. You can see the types of engagements that are happening, but it's rigorous, ongoing work. It is not a one-off thing. It's beautifully integrated with the work that we do on stage, with the work that's being done in the classroom.
here at Logan, too.
Yes, here at Logan, and I think in the sort of University of Chicago arts ecosystem, as we think about that, there are so many different ways. I think one of the things I learned recently is that Court is really at the forefront of civic engagement on campus. We also have the Civic Actors Studio that has come into Court. So there are ways in which the theater is actually a leading voice in engaging the South Side and reflecting back some of the issues, some of the questions, some of the things that are important to this particular community. Earlier, Gabby was talking about the incredible artistic legacy of the South Side, Bronzeville, et cetera. So it's a long game. It's a process, I think, that's very much in motion. I'm excited to learn about it and to think about ways in which the work we do on stage is reflecting the many communities. I mean, that's what's so rich and what really drew me to Court and UChicago and Chicago in general. There are multiple communities here that we serve, that we uplift, that we're interested in, that we want to engage with. And so I think there's an ongoing project that is going to be super fruitful. It will be bearing fruit in many ways in the years to come. So stay tuned for more on that front, but also just to uplift what's already going on, which is really, really deep. The other thing that's been really beautiful is I'm learning a lot about our engagement with CPS, so with the Chicago Public School System, and we're embedded in schools nearby, and the ways in which we're bringing teaching artists into the classroom, especially places where theater doesn't, the drama teacher is no longer there, or ways in which, again, the theater can make these very important pillars of understanding and communication at the very youngest level. So there's a lot of beautiful work happening there with teaching artists as well. So thanks for that
Do we
question.
have questions from the audience that have been in conversation all day? We want to bring forward some of what you've been talking about, push it further. Yes, I see a hand over here.
Thank you so much for this very poetic and beautiful discussion. I want to return to Peter's. You're just so wonderful to hear it, soothing to hear, at this analogy between, or the root between theater and ritual. Kind of want to stay on that and press upon it. There's also a certain danger of equating theater to ritual, of bestowing upon it an ancestry, a sublime, something so sacred, so sublime and so pure, this root and this antiquity to it. And while there's also, so there's theater used to be ritual before it becomes bread and circuits, before it becomes spectacles and entertainment. Yet if we think more on ritual, ritual can also be used as a way to reinforce the order, right? Creating a temporary, non-consequential or manageable relief so we can return to normal life and the order keeps going on. And how do you differentiate that kind of ritual? And a follow-up, well, not a follow-up, just another sentence to this, is that if we see their democratic ritual, there are also fascist ritual. And as you mentioned, theater can be so intense, so provocative, so fantastical. And guess what else can also be intense, provocative, and fantastical? Authoritarianism and fascism that's going on right now. And just want you to say more on that.
Thank you. Speaking of poetic and beautiful, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Just to say, there are lots of things that you can do really badly. Like driving a car, you can kill a lot of people, but it doesn't mean we make cars illegal. Taking drugs, actually there's a lot to be learned. And just to make something good or bad is not so helpful. But a ritual, of course, can be monstrous or it can be life-giving. And I'm teaching right now my myth and ritual class at UCLA, and I told my students last night, I said that the exotic tribe whose campfire we're sifting through and whose last meal we're trying to recreate is your family. And I want to deal with the myths you grew up with and the rituals you enact every day of your life. And let's look at where that puts us. And myth means two things. It means something that was never true, or a moment in your life that you carry your whole life and that guides your life. Myth means both things. Ritual means something you do that's empty and has no heart and no consciousness, or it means the one time your mind is present. It can be both. So for me, in my classes and in my work, I call attention to both meanings of both words. Because what are the rituals that we accept unquestioningly, and why is that? And how would your life change if you started to enact another set of rituals? And again, rituals are like practice for living. It's like anything. You have to do it a lot of times until you can do it consciously and with full presence. And so, for me, the ritual is a path towards something. It's not the destination. And the same as a performance. As Avery was saying, we're planting seeds, and I would really emphasize that, is in a performance, those seeds go into each person's heart differently. You have no idea how people are responding. You have no idea what they're taking home with them, because we are all different from each other. We really are. We don't have the same mentality. We have so much going on. And so the image that I'm showing is responded to by everybody in the room completely differently. Where that goes in, and then those seeds are planted in somebody's heart and mind, and then the next 20 years, what is the sunlight they will give those seeds? What is the water they give those seeds? And so some people, there will be a beautiful forest 20 years later. And for other people, who knows? But I think that's one of the elements of performance, is that it's open-ended, and you don't have a simple result, it can't be summarized in, these are the obvious. That's why this era that we're living in, that wants always to know what the results of every action are going to be in the grant proposal ahead of time. And what we're doing is actually something you don't know, which is the beauty of human beings, is there's still this open area in all of us. And so, as always, it's an adventure. And you're right, I think what we can do as artists is construct these things so that they have dialogue and they lead to something that creates a sense of the possibility of change. And if I could give you an example, for me, of fascism, that is the art of film. The art of film is the favorite medium of fascists because you can't talk back to the screen. The screen does not care whether you're dead or alive, and it's just going to give you what they want you to see, when you want to see it, as they want you to see it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I will say in the early silent films where, this art form is capable of nasty levels of mind control and propaganda, you see the great artists figuring out how to make this film generate dialogue. And that's always our task, is frequently we're handling toxic materials. But at what point does that become a cauterization, or what point does that become an antibody, or at what point does that become something that actually stimulates the discussion, the awareness, and the sense of complexity and conflict? That means people can then begin to examine their own behavior and make up their own minds.
Hi, thank you for this. I have a question in the context of thinking of new work development and the kind of projects you're talking about. With projects that are designed so much around the dialogues and uses of space and gatherings, and and maybe it's just an example of a project that you've developed, what has a workshop process look like? Like, how does revision and experiment, how does that work in the context of some of these terms when those are the kind of how you're thinking about the work?
Yeah, I have a very...
Leslie Buxbaum, writer of Out There, just FYI.
Oh, well, thank you. I do have a very different idea, perhaps, of text than some people, that the text is this absolute thing that never moves. And in fact, a lot of the projects that I do, the text is reconstituted in every new context and location that we're performing it. And so for me, the text is very much in response to where we are, who we're with, and always is about, first of all, not just appearing anywhere, but having months of preparation and dialogue with people in that neighborhood who are themselves shifting what that text is and what it means and how it arrives where it arrives. And the next project I'm going to do is going to be in 8 cities, and we reconstituted it in all 8 cities with activists in each of those cities, so that what we're performing is also a narrative that the activists in that particular geography need to have put forward, and is the result of their experience, their lived experience. So for me, what's great about theater is it's not the complication of publishing of a book is that, the book about Guatemala that you read in high school is so wrong about everything, and you have to rewrite all this stuff later once you've read the CIA, went into the CIA documents. The great thing about a piece of theater is we learn something new this morning, we can change it tonight. And it's constantly in flow, constantly in flux, constantly responding to knowledge as lived, experienced, and constantly shifting. And for me, that's one of the most beautiful gifts of theater, is that it is able to respond to a living situation.
But is that a little little different. So I'm picking up from Leslie's question, like when you really have this unformed lump of a play that you are trying to turn into a play, and you need so many of those moments of talking about it, moving it forward. So it's one thing to say, okay, Aeschylus will do this again, but in a totally new way. But like when you're trying to get something from its early searching, reaching moment to something that has more form, and I mean, maybe you don't want the form, but probably some people want the form, or you, like, how do you get, how are we raising this little creature up?
Okay, just to say two things. One is I really do believe, first of all, when I do Aeschylus, when I do Sophocles, I hire a contemporary playwright to rewrite it, so that all the references belong to us now, and we understand where we are and where we are in it, and so on and so on. For a new play, it's really exciting because usually the new play just gets the comments of the play doctors. And for me, what's very exciting about a new play in a very live situation, it's like, I don't know if people are fans of the beautiful dance in Hawaii, the Hawaiian hula. And you know, hula, you're shifting from hip to hip, and your body just keeps in this flow and this movement. That's because you're dancing on lava, which is newly created land. And the land has not hardened yet. And that's why your body is constantly finding this flow and trying to find this place where how do you live in this constantly shifting situation. So for me, I really love doing new work exactly for fresh audiences who have all kinds of amazing responses that would never have occurred to you because you're coming from a certain place and this audience is coming from a completely different place. And also what's so beautiful about so many situations when you're not in a distinguished location, but you're in a bad neighborhood, is the people who live there have no problem telling you exactly what they think. Nobody's softening one thing. And if you're wrong, they will let you know in ways you will never forget, and you will change that now. And so for me, the other great thing is it's much more dynamic to be in a place where people are not trained to be polite in terms of giving back their opinions. And also, what are the experiences and memories you're triggering in their lives? Because we all have different experiences and memories that are being triggered by things. And so for me, that's one of the most valuable things of developing a piece in those kind of places. And a lot of my work in Los Angeles is exactly in places where, if I can put it another way, many people who are living very difficult and complicated, under-supported lives, and unhoused people have all day long to think about these things, and we're in a hurry. When we did Hercules at the Chicago Lyric Opera, and we had lots of workshops here at the Chicago University, I just asked a really simple question of the university. I said, could we just get together veterans from this campus? The meeting was one of the greatest meetings that will ever occur and cut through the hierarchy of the university system. Full professors, we're sitting next to janitors, we're sitting next to technicians in the labs, we're sitting next to people working in the hospital, we're sitting next to graduate students, and everybody had experience of being in the military. And everybody in that room was equal, in a way they're not most days at the university. We had a huge project with unhoused people in West Chicago. And when those people came, and the Chicago Lyric Opera, bless them, gave free tickets to all veterans and their families. So there were well-heeled opera audiences. And then the next seats over were 5 people sobbing. And the well-heeled people were saying, well, we know what an opera is, but what? And then the people who didn't know what an opera was, I'll never forget, well, there's lots of things we won't forget, but I just want to mention one thing. There was one gentleman who spends his days sitting on the sidewall. And what he got obsessed with were the super titles that were appearing over the proscenium. The opera was sung in English, but just to make it clear what was being said, everything that was being spoken was put on these titles. And this guy said, I need that. I'm sitting on the street and people pass me and think I'm not thinking anything. They think I'm stupid. I want all my thoughts to be projected on the wall right above me so people know that I'm thinking. That's all I'm saying is when you are in another neighborhood, in another situation, there are a whole lot of other responses and they're seeing things really differently. I mean, the person who was sitting next to him talked about the countertenor in the Handel oratorio from 1748. And he said, you know what that sound is? You know what the sound of that high voice coming out of a man? That's blood coming out of the mouth. So these are people who are hearing countertenor in a way you would not have heard a countertenor before. And then you say, I need new ears. I need to listen to everything in my life differently.
Could I add a little?
Sure,
Thank
please.
you, Peter. I think, Leslie, also to your question, I think one of the things that I've experienced over these decades of working with you, Peter, is that, you know, making theater has such a depth of research, and there's such a deep well behind everything you see, right? And I think one of the things that's really extraordinary is how that goes beyond the rehearsal room and how that goes beyond the text and beyond, you know, just the tangible things that you see. And I think that's the great joy. In some ways, we have to make that more visible for people. And I, over the years, have always found so much inspiration and joy when people see the process and they audience members bear witness to those rooms, right? And often the best work, I think, has been sort of filtered through and evolved through these processes that aren't like visibly theatrical, right? It's like rehearsal is one thing, but the sort of mining of information and themes and things that we need to cultivate in order to get to the point of getting to the rehearsal room to have the conversations with actors. And I think what's so deep about your work, Peter, is that has a human dimension that goes beyond the making of art, right? And the making of art is embedded in these human connections and in the ways in which we have to relate to each other as humans. And I think that's something we do have to make more visible sometimes, because I think audiences come and they experience something and they yes or no it, and they go away and there's, you know, what's for dinner? And back to kind of Joe's question about activism, to me, a powerful play is one that over dinner you are debating what you just saw. Right, and that you acknowledge that there's a huge amount of research, there's a huge amount of thought that's gone into every decision on what you're seeing. And thinking about you, Leslie, and David and Aaron, and this process of making a new work, like hours and hours and days and years of wrestling with really intricate topics and themes and stories, and the audience gets a 90-minute top-level version of that, right? And so how do we make more visible? And I think that's what's amazing about being on a university campus. We can have these conversations. We can invite you into that process. Students can be part of that process that is actually so deep. And that is, in a way, I think the crisis of American theater is what we were talking about earlier, which is it's all about the product, right? And it's all about the transaction. We made something for you, you bought a ticket, you're gonna see the show, and then you're gonna leave.
Yeah, and your thumbs up, thumbs down,
Thumbs
right?
up, thumbs down, and the success of the show is based on your thumbs up or thumbs down, or a certain critic's thumbs up or thumbs down. And so I'm really interested in how we make more visible the depth of the process of making work and the impact. We talk a lot about ways in which what we do will manifest in an action from the audience. If we're doing a show and you go and donate to the homeless shelter, or you go and serve meals, like that means we did our job as theater makers, right? If that is sort of part of the fabric of that piece that we were making. And so that question of action and activity, I think, like how do we make it more visible, and what the ask is of you all as an audience member, right? It's not just to consume what we're giving you, right?
Or I was thinking on the other hand, or to professionalize. What I'm learning are techniques and things of delivery, you know, being immersed in that process, and that can be, you know, in, I don't know if you'd say the spirit of amateurism, but you're not trying to perfect a craft that then is a professional quality you possess to move on to these other things, but you're engaged in a process that sort of puts you in touch with something that's alive and emerging, and that can be audiences and students and lots of different people, right? It's so closed off at this point. So even just having an after, or maybe we should force everyone into pre-discussions as I now think, but
and also, how many voices are inside the creation
yeah,
of that
exactly,
work?
right. That's
that
the other
it's not
thing,
just
yeah.
one person's idea sitting at a desk.
Yeah, yeah.
It is actually really, this work is the result of, like all of us,
Yeah.
if we've traveled a little bit, if we've seen a few things, if we've been in a few really different worlds,
Yeah.
our lives are different.
Right.
And so, and our awareness of things is different. And for me, a play is like that. As you want as many different people in the room as possible, and you want really wide range of things. And one of the things that maddens critics about a lot of the things I do is I do invite people who have never previously had a conversation or could not have a conversation to be in a production. And the production is going to be the question is, will these people be capable of actually talking to each other and hearing each other? And in some cases in my life, the answer is no.
Yeah.
And then the critic says, well, there was a failure for this scene to ignite. And you want to say, yes, there was. And that is the world we're living in. You know, that is actually the testimony.
Right.
And for me, one of the most beautiful things about Greek drama is, of course, that most of the people on stage were not professional actors. It was the chorus. They were citizens who you would meet at the bus stop. And they're just giving you this testimony from what it feels like at the bus stop. And for me, that is part of theater, is both the raw and the cooked, you know, and that sense that something is highly detailed and artistically imagined, but also something is just raw testimony. And there's a place for all of those things in our world. And what's important is that the relation of those two things is dynamic.
Yeah.
Not that this is over here and that's over there. But you're creating a structure which says, no, this is absolutely, this is this way because that is that way. And you keep the aliveness of the exchange rather than the walls that are in between those worlds. Is you say, no, these worlds are actually touching each other and are actually completely influencing each other in our society. And as always, what is near is far and what is far is near, which is your T-shirt and underwear is made in Bangladesh, and the fingers of Bangladeshi teenagers are touching your body here as we sit in this room. Like, this is near everything in our lives. Whatever we're doing is affecting somebody way somewhere else. My dickies are made by, people in a nightmare factory in Honduras surrounded by men with guns. And all of these things are in our karma. The strawberry tart that we just ate, that strawberries picked in Oxnard, California by migrant workers covered with pesticide, and the woman who picked your strawberry will be stillborn because of that pesticide. And that's in your strawberry. Theater is about the karma that we're all sharing and that we're all living through. And our lives are not separate, ever. Our lives are so intertwined. And theater is just a moment to stop and taste that. And maybe I'll just give one last example. I'm sorry, I don't mean to go on and on and on.
No.
But in terms of Euripides, the one project we did of the Children of Heracles, a play that, again, most scholars thought was not really by Euripides because the this text is so weird, but in fact, once you get into it, you realize why it's so weird, and Europe's entire point. Anyway, just to say, it's about immigration, which we have not solved in 25,000 years, 2,500 years, and just to say, before the show, every night, we had people without papers in conversation, like Avery has just mentioned, with immigration judges, people who run detention centers, border guards. Mm-hmm. And as you know, when you come to America, we only accept 2 stories. Mm. So you can't say what happened to you and what you're coming from, because that will be rejected. So you have to lie. Meanwhile, the immigration judge has a list of things that even what he feels about this person, and who knows how much they feel, because right now the actual legal length of an immigration interview with the judge is now 35 seconds. Oof. They have this list, they have to check things off, so whatever they're feeling is irrelevant. So at this crucial meeting between 2 people, both people are lying. Mm-hmm. So it took doing a theater project to get a place where somebody without papers and an immigration judge could have an honest conversation. Mm. Yeah. Right? That's theater exists to create the reality that can't yet exist in reality. And we make our first steps, hopefully, towards the reality we're really hoping for.
Thank you all so much. We have time for one more question.
Oh my God, right here.
You're here. You can just...
I am a trial.
There we go.
I've been wondering just a lot, because I think what you're all really talking about is reaching into people's humanity. And the theater is one of the few places left, other than live music, where we have that opportunity. And I was recently hearing some maven of AI claiming that actually it was going to open up the path for more people to study the humanities, because the best way to train AI to answer your question properly is to ask the right question in the first place. And I just wonder, it leads me to wonder, what do you guys think about either the challenge or the peril of AI for theater and for new work?
I'm ready to roll on that. If you can't tell the difference between a flat screen and reality, I'm sorry. I mean, it's so dull. It's so predictable, and human beings are just by nature gonna mess you up and gonna get in your face. And hello, we are irreverent by nature. We are gonna break up whatever feels like it's trying to control us by nature. That is the human nature. And they say, well, but AI's in schools, like they're second graders who have to check ChatGPT before they answer the question. And my attitude is also, most of the history of education in the West has been monstrous. Kids were beaten into memorizing Latin and Greek. And I have to say that lovely thing about that is it's some kind of weird memory of Greek democracy that's somehow in the back of why they're forcing all these kids to learn Greek. It's like, what? But anyway, in the meantime, they're being flogged and whatever else until they memorize these horrible dead languages and these horrible dead authors and blah, 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 for how many centuries? And yet the most amazing people came out of all that. So my attitude is, no matter how bad it gets, human beings are just amazing. And they're never going to sit for it. They're never going to accept it. They're never going to swallow it. And they're going to do everything they can do to wreck it. And I'm ready.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Avery Hoffman and Peter Sellars for such an incredibly mind-opening experience and conversation. And I look forward to seeing you next fall at the next Dean Salon. Don't know what it will be about, but it will be good. It will be at least as good as this.
Thank you, Dean Nelson.
Debbie. you.